welcome Leah.
Hi. Oh, I'm so glad to be here in New York. I have a little bit of a cold, so I'll do the best I can. So this is me. I'm Leah Culver. I've been a developer for 12 years in San Francisco, in Silicon Valley. I'm actually a lot older than I probably look with my hoodie and tennis shoes. I'm actually doing my third startup right now, and I'll talk a little bit about my previous two as well. As Kate mentioned, we're doing office hours. Mine are actually after lunch, so I'm going to try and be really quick so that you guys can get to lunch. We're actually already running a little bit behind. But that being said, if you have any questions for me about startups or want to talk about your own startup ideas or just want to chat, come by at 2 out at the tables out there and say hi. So sorry, I'll go as quickly as I can so that we can eat. My current startup is called Breaker. It's an iPhone app for listening to podcasts. And as Kate mentioned, Kim Kardashian just started listening to Serial. How many people have heard the podcast Serial out there? Yeah, it's probably the most popular podcast of all time, but it's about 2 years old. So she tweeted a little bit behind the times. She said, I'm a little behind the times, and anyone want to recommend some podcasts? And I said, well, that's one of the reasons I created Breaker, was to recommend great podcasts for people to listen to based on what other Breaker listeners are listening to and what your friends are listening to. So you can follow people. It's fairly social, and you can get good podcast recommendations, because it is a big problem finding sort of the next thing to listen to. So this is Breaker. It's actually the top social podcast app in the App Store, one of the top podcast apps. We have every single podcast available, and you can do social things like follow people, like, share, comment, send episodes to people, post them on Twitter, that sort of thing. So that's the quick plug for it. But yeah, like I said, find, follow friends, send episodes. I can probably skip this slide for speed's sake. And the idea actually was born out of, I listened to Serial, same as Kim Kardashian. We have so much in common. We both listened to Serial and then said, what do we want to listen to next? I'll talk about my previous startups as well and the ideas I had for those. So Pownce, the idea was sort of kind of one of these first very mobile-focused social apps, and a combination of file sharing and mobile social. It actually got compared a lot to Twitter in the early days, and that wasn't entirely the intent. The intent was to post things. This is long before a Facebook newsfeed, which is kind of interesting. But it was the idea that you could post things and your friends could see them, which was similar to Twitter, but also much more. I think Pownce in its original phase was much more like Facebook is today, but not like Facebook was then. So that was the idea behind my first startup. And my second startup, I wanted to do a combination of sort of forums and chat. So a little bit like topic-based chat, and it didn't quite work. It was a little too complicated. People didn't want to go into topics to chat. They just wanted to chat with people they knew. So we ended up sort of pivoting to making it workplace chat, based on sort of looking at the different segments of users that were highly using the app. We were able to pivot. But I feel like one of the things we sort of learned from moving Convore to Grove and pivoting was to look at what users are actually doing on the site, and I think we would have had less of a splashy launch and would have liked to do more beta testing and figure out what people actually wanted to do with it. So my current app is Breaker, like I said, and it's just generally, the idea behind it was not let's make an iOS app and let's make it social and let's make it for listening to podcasts. The original idea was just, I want to do something in podcasting. I think podcasting is going to be big in the next few years, and this was about 3 years ago that I was thinking about it, and I think it's still growing, and I think it's going to be bigger in the next 2 to 3 years. So if you guys want to quote me on that, podcasting is only getting bigger. And actually, this was sort of, I always refer back to this tweet as sort of what makes a good startup idea. So if you're thinking about building your own startup and want to sort of validate, is your idea sort of good? Keith Raboy tweeted this, and I consider him very straightforward and very honest, but this tweet is a little bit vague. So the tweet is, the formula for startup success: find a large, highly fragmented industry with low NPS, vertically integrated solution, and simplified value product. What does that mean? That's a pretty dense tweet. So find a highly fragmented industry, so something where there isn't a clear winner in the space. So you may not want to go for mobile photo sharing. There's already an Instagram, or you may not want to do, I think the music industry is very, users listening to music, specifically streaming music, is pretty crowded, right? There's Spotify. and there's a lot of competitors in the space. So you want to find an industry that's more fragmented. So when we were looking at podcasting, it's definitely a fragmented industry. There's no clear winner. If there's any clear winner, it's maybe Apple, but Apple's specialty isn't podcasting, right? It's the devices you all use, the iPhones, the laptops. It's not to be a dominant player in podcasting. And then low NPS, Net Promoter Score. So an area where people aren't very happy. Net Promoter Scores, if you've seen those, like rank your happiness 1 to 10, and it's just like one simple question. That's the Net Promoter Score, and mostly they're looking for, most people answer in the high and low ends of it. So find an industry where people really aren't happy with the current solutions is basically the gist of this tweet. So find an industry without a dominant player where people aren't happy with the current solutions, or are just kind of putting up with them. And then vertically integrate a solution to simplify value product. So for podcasting, that meant we started with an app, but we just recently launched another product in the space, and we want to sort of cover the whole space of podcasting to simplify things for both podcasters and listeners. So that's the long-winded thing. Obviously, we're not quite there yet today, but that's sort of the path we're trying to follow at Breaker, and something that you could follow in your own startup. So look for a highly fragmented space where people aren't really happy with the solutions, and then build something big. Like, don't think small. Don't build a really niche product. Think, hey, I want to get into the space of, whether it's podcasting, developer tools, trying to think of some other open space, something where you can dominate that entire space, because that's where you create an actual venture scale business. Okay, so once I had an idea, I knew I wanted to work in podcasting. I was like, I was actually planning to never do a startup again unless I had like this previous formula. I was like looking for this, and I saw podcasting, and I was like, great, this perfectly fits this. It's a highly fragmented industry where actually interest in it and user interest is growing. People aren't really happy with the tools, and I think we can really improve the technology and build something big here. So then I started looking for a co-founder. My previous startup, I went from having 2 co-founders to being a solo founder. And I really didn't enjoy being a solo founder. Maybe you guys are tougher than I am, but I always like to have someone else who can help run the company. So I reached out to a bunch of my friends, talked to actually a lot of people, interviewed. I would say I got down to about 4 candidates for it, and then eventually Eric and I just kept working together and kept building things, which was a different approach than I've done in the past. Oftentimes someone will just approach me. Like for my previous startups, I was pretty much approached and being like, hey, can you build this for us, and you can be a co-founder, and I just said yes. This time I was actually going out and looking for people to work with. So my co-founder is Eric Berlin. You might know him as Eric Michael Zober. And then, so I had my co-founder. We were both super interested in podcasts, wanted to work together. So where did we start working on our idea? And actually it was surprising. Like, we didn't lay down code right away. The first thing we actually did was talk to people. So we interviewed both podcasters and podcast listeners to find out what they really wanted. And what we found out from podcasters was actually surprising. We actually first considered building a tool for podcasters. We were like, let's build a hosting site, or let's do something for them that really helps them like reach a bigger audience. And that's what they said they wanted. They were like, we don't care about metrics. We don't care that much about these other things. What we really want is people to listen to our podcasts. And so when we took a look at that, we were like, well, it's actually hard to get your podcast discovered and hard to get people to even hear of you in the first place. Maybe that's the problem we should really be tackling, is like, as listeners, how do you discover stuff that you might not find because it's not the top 10 charts in Apple as picked by like their editors, or it's not either picked by Apple in a magical formula, or it's not, very huge and popular because it gets mentioned other places. Like, how can we actually surface good content that people want to listen to? And so the next step is we actually didn't quite quit our jobs yet. We built a prototype. So this is where we actually got into code. So once we figured out what we wanted to build, it was pretty easy to just build it on the side and test it with users first. And this is different than my previous startups. Previously, I think my first 2, I was actually unemployed when I started my previous 2 startups, and so it was my full-time job. For Breaker, I actually had a full-time job for the first 9 months that it existed, and we worked on it pretty much as a side project. So this is actually a photo of a Sunday, because we worked mostly on Sundays on it. So I didn't actually work after work, because I get pretty tired after work, but I had a free day on the weekends. So we built very, very slowly. But it was great because it was very low risk, right? We could try different things. We could send it out to people, and we didn't have to worry about it being our sole source of income or worry about it being like a huge success right away. And then we set goals for ourselves. So my first goal in building the iOS app, I had the job of building the iOS app. I was just working with Eric at the time, and he did the back end, so he was doing the server side. And my goal in building the iOS app was to get Eric to switch from the podcast player he was currently using. My goal was to get him to switch from Overcast, which was actually, it was a mix of, I don't know that it was super difficult, because he was motivated to use Breaker, like because it was his own app, but it was difficult enough. Like it had to have all the features that a typical podcast app had. So a good first goal for any sort of startup is to get one user that's not you. Oftentimes when I was building smaller projects, when I was starting programming, my dad would always be the first person to use my apps. So my advice to you guys is find someone who's going to be like your first user and someone who can be pretty honest with you and let you know if they actually want to use it regularly. So at this point, I'll take a little side note. We actually had a code name for the project. I think it had something to do with like Japanese fish flags. But we needed like a real name. And I actually really hate naming startups. I've actually joked that I'm even afraid to have children because I just don't want to name anything anymore. Like I'm done naming. I've had two previous I've done the naming thing several times and it's a huge pain. So I actually made Eric in charge of naming. I was like, Eric, you can name this startup. And it actually took us about a month, a whole month to name something. But because we had like a code name, it didn't really matter. We were just operating under this code name and kept building the product. And then as like a background process, we also ran this like naming. And like when we'd hear something cool, we'd like suggest it. And we had some criteria for naming and something you guys should all think about and that I've learned sort of the hard way through my previous startups. So for Breaker specifically, it had to be easy to say. Most people say this is like the phone call test. Like if you're doing it over the phone, you could tell it to someone and they would know how to spell it. And people actually ask all the time, Breaker, you mean just spelled like breaker? And we're like, yeah, there's no vowels missing, nothing. Yeah, there's actually an E before the R. So easy to say over the air for us meant a lot because we wanted podcasters to talk about us. They want to be like, you know, get this podcast on Breaker, subscribe on Breaker. So something that was easy to say and like you kind of got the first time someone said it. One thing we didn't check very well that you guys should all check if you're making an iOS app is how available is the name in the App Store. So our fatal flaw was not that there was another app called Breaker, but there's a million brick-breaking games. So for a long time, if you searched for Breaker, I would say almost 6 months after we launched, if you searched for Breaker in the App Store, we were probably result number 40. After all these brick-breaking games that was like, had keywords like break and breaker and like, oh, it was horrible. Thankfully now they've sort of shuffled and we've had enough App Store reviews and things to sort of move up to the top. By the way, use the App Store rater in your app and get people to rate your app. It'll move up higher in the App Store. That's my only App Store SEO trick. But before you even launch something, make sure that the name isn't conflicting with specifically games. Games will just kill you. Everybody loves games. They're very popular. They will not help make your app popular. You can also do a trademark search online. They're free. Just Google for trademark search. I don't remember the site offhand, but it's easy to just make sure that there's nothing with that trademark. And then check the name in another language. Pop it into Google Translate. See if it means anything weird in another language. I didn't learn this one the hard way. I actually was taught this from someone else. Like, just make sure it doesn't mean anything bad in another language. And for us, we actually were looking for a name that was kind of edgy. Like part of what we wanted to do in podcasting was make something cool. A lot of podcast apps have the word cast in them, and it's like cast, boring. Or they have something that feels heavy or dull or literary. And we didn't see podcasts as just educational. We actually listened to a lot of really fun podcasts. People always like to ask my favorite podcast, and it's not what you would think. It's not TED Talks. It's not Invisibilia. It's not, educational stuff. Some of my favorite podcasts are actually, I love this one that's like a bachelorette recap show. So we didn't want to, yeah, I know, guilty of watching trashy reality shows. But we didn't want to make Breaker boring. Like we wanted a fun name that wasn't like, too stodgy. And we loved hearing, actually there's a podcast called How I Built This, which I totally recommend you listen to. They interview the founder of Virgin Records and Virgin the airline, Richard Branson, and he talks about how he came up with the name Virgin, which you think would be like a terrible name for a company, but he loved it because you remember it. Like, because it's edgy and because it's something you wouldn't expect, you remember it. So Breaker was great for us because like it has this like kind of negative, you don't want to break things, like that's bad, but you remember it. You're like, oh, it's like edgier, and it's memorable. And we didn't want to have anything where you could commonly misspell it or mispronounce it. My company, Grove.io, was called Groove all the time. It drove me crazy. One of the names we wanted to call Breaker was Angle, and we weren't going to call it that because I'm like, we're just going to get called Angel all the time. People just transpose those two letters, and I don't think you want to go there. So yeah, make sure that it's not easy to transpose a letter or add a letter to spell something else, which is a little harder to test. But there it is. OK, so that's my little bit on naming. And so after we had a name, we set a new goal, which was to go from one user, Eric, who's our only user at the time, maybe me, like 2 users, to actually having hundreds of users. And 100 was the goal because that's about how many friends and family you can get to sort of try something. So we just asked, like, I think Eric's aunt was like user number 6. My sister was like user number 10. My brother-in-law, our friends, our family, anyone we could get to try Breaker. And we did this via test flight. So how many of you guys have used test flight for a project? I hope everyone has used it. Yay, OK, great. Yeah, I don't know that you need this advice, but test flight was great for us. They keep raising the caps on the number of users you can put into test flight. So even if you have 10,000 family members, it's a pretty big family. I hope you don't have that many family members for your own sanity. You can add them all on test flight. So I highly recommend, as soon as you have anything sort of working. I mean, you guys, I wish I should have put up a screenshot of how bad Breaker looked at this point. It was basically just like a list of podcasts, and you could press play to listen to them. It was pretty bad. But we were able to get it into test flight and get it into the hands of users. And actually, so here, we did this fun thing where every time we had an update, we would copy the list of email addresses out of test flight, and we'd send these emails to users saying, you know, this is basically like our changelog, like what's new, and then getting feedback from those users. So they were really fun. I wish we still did these, and actually we've been talking about starting to do them for all users, like here's an update of what's going on in the app, because they were kind of silly and fun, and we got a lot of feedback through that. So it was a great way to sort of get feedback. And the next step in Breaker, so this is about, I would say, like 9 months into building Breaker, we applied to Y Combinator. And this is the point at which I would say we became sort of a real startup. Once we had hundreds of users using the app, giving us feedback, and we're really liking it, we were like, OK, we actually have something here. We quit our day jobs. We actually quit our day jobs before we were accepted to Y Combinator. We were like, we're going to do this no matter what, so let's just go all in. And we were accepted for winter 2017. This is actually my second time doing Y Combinator. My previous startup I did as well. So if you guys want to come by office hours after this and you want to ask about Y Combinator or ask about applying, I'm happy to chat about it. I've only had really good experiences with them. I've really enjoyed my time, and it's been super beneficial for both my startups. Oh, by the way, Y Combinator is a startup incubator. I'm sure, I don't know, has anybody here not heard of Y Combinator? OK, come talk to me about it. But what we learned from this, and actually learned from those previous 9 months of working on a startup as a side project, was to do things as they're needed. So I had done 2 previous startups before. I had gone through this whole route, like, you know, incorporating a company, getting an office, hiring employees. And to be honest, while the first 2 times those all seemed really fun and exciting, the third time around I was like, we have to do the documents for incorporation. Oh my gosh, we have to like look for and pay for an office space, all these things I really didn't want to do the third time. And what I learned from this was we sort of did them as needed. So like we didn't actually incorporate the company until I think a year into its existence as like an app that people were using and you could actually download from test flight. And we actually incorporated so that we could launch, so that we could actually go into the App Store. We needed like a DUNS number to put it on the App Store. So we finally incorporated the app. And the result of that was we had already been accepted to Y Combinator, and they did all the paperwork for free. So basically, we got a free incorporation as part of waiting that year. If we had done it right away, we probably would have had to pay for it. And who knows, maybe Breaker wouldn't have shaped up to be a real thing anyways. So what's the point of going through the work if it doesn't actually work out? So we did this the same way. Like, we didn't actually raise any money until we needed to raise money to actually hire people other than ourselves to work on it, and that we quit our day jobs and we actually had to pay ourselves and pay other people. And the same with Office Space. So I guess what I'm saying is the third time through this, some of that stuff, while that stuff kind of seems exciting, that's not what makes a company, and that's not what makes a product, and that's not what gets you users. So all of this stuff is way, way less important. And my advice is to do it as you need it, and not do it a second before, because you never know how things are gonna work out, and it's much easier to just do this stuff when you actually need it. We actually got an Office Space because we had an intern come on a J1 visa from Sweden, and part of the J1 visa is you have to give a tour of the office that they'll be working in. And we didn't have an office, so we're like, okay. So we got an office 2 days before this person came from Sweden to tour the Office Space. So, all right. So goal number 3 at this point was we had hundreds of users, friends, and family, and we needed to go spread to people we didn't know. So we had reached kind of the limit of friends and friends of friends, and so it was still kind of spreading by word of mouth, a few people at a time, but we really wanted to go bigger. And Y Combinator actually encouraged us to pick a metric, and we picked weekly active users. So we needed to get more active users to measure when we were doing Y Combinator. And we actually used this product. We were the very first product to ever use Product Hunt Ship. Have you seen these new ship things? Here, I'll skip to this. Have you seen one of these screens? Hey, sign up for this beta. Well, we got to sort of beta test the product as a beta product. We sort of launched on Product Hunt with this new hey, sign up for this test flight beta. But I'd recommend this for anyone who wants to launch kind of publicly and get some beta testers. You can just sign up on Product Hunt, and you can launch your product there. And it actually got us thousands of users. It was super useful and beneficial. And we were able to sort of get people that weren't in our immediate social network to try out. And also, everyone on Product Hunt is everyone that goes to this website wants to try new things, right? So check out Product Hunt if you want to try new things, and then I recommend launching on Product Hunt. It was the biggest spike of traffic we ever got. It was bigger than launching. It was bigger than being featured. We got new app of the week in the App Store, and it got us way more users than that. So Product Hunt for us was a really great way to get people trying it out. And so after we had users we didn't know, we wanted to actually launch Breaker. So we launched on Y Combinator's demo day in March 2017. Terrible idea. Do not launch when you are pitching to a bunch of investors. We were Eric was pitching, and I was scrambling, trying to make sure everything worked with Breaker, and the site stayed up and the app still worked. I wouldn't recommend that, but it was definitely exciting. And what are we doing now? So that was March of 2017. Obviously, it's been a long time since then. We're continuing to work on Breaker the app, and we also just, about a month ago, launched a new product. Like I said, we want to sort of do everything in podcasting. We just don't tell our competitors that. We want to actually do everything, and we're going to compete with all of them. But we launched our first sort of hosting product and our product for podcasters, which allows podcasters to charge for podcasts or individual episodes. So what's interesting about it is up until this point, the only way you could monetize podcasts was either by advertising or by sort of donation models. Or there were some sites or some services were experimenting with sort of users pay for a premium subscription and get some premium content. We decided to go directly to podcasters and say, hey, if you want to publish a premium episode and charge for it, say it's some bonus content, it's a extended interview or an uncut version, or we have a podcast that's an ad-free version on Breaker right now. If you want to release that content and you want to charge for it, that's up to you. You can pick your pricing, you can charge extra money for this bonus content, and it works. Podcast listeners, if you're very loyal to a podcast and they put out this bonus episode, or they say, hey, pay for our ad-free version, it tends to convert really well. So that's what we've been working on lately. We call it a marketplace for premium podcasts. And we're still working on building Breaker as fast as we can and shipping things as quickly as can. And I'll talk a little bit about sort of our product process, because this was one of the other things I've done differently than previous startups. Previously, product development at the startups I've worked on has sort of come top down. It's like the founders have an idea and everyone just executes on that idea, which is great if the founders can sort of see the future and predict everything, which we can't. So a lot of Breaker is built on user feedback, but also we have a whole product process that everyone at Breaker participates in to sort of make the product better. And it's based on this blog post by Michael Seibel. I don't know if you need to copy down this URL. It's like not even really readable on the slides. But if you Google for Y Combinator, Michael Seibel, product development, development cycle fundamentals, you can find it. It's a great breakdown of how they built things at SocialCam. And basically, the idea is we do 1 week long sprints. We used to do 2. Now we move even faster. And we have 1 meeting at the beginning of the sprint. Everyone suggests features they want to work on, bug fixes, and tests, and they don't have to be for yourself. So like sometimes I'll have an idea for a design task or something on the server side or a performance improvement. So it doesn't have to just be like I'm suggesting an iOS thing. Everyone gets to suggest things that they think should improve Breaker. And then we all get to vote on priority, high, medium, low, difficulty, easy, medium, and hard. And we try and reach consensus. So if someone says, hey, I really think we should do this week, it's high priority. Someone else says, I think this is low. You discuss why you think that. And this is just for the upcoming week. And then once we have we know it goes from high to low, easy to difficult, and they go into a GitHub project board. This really helps us focus on building the things that are the most important for that week. So I highly recommend reading the whole blog post. I'm just really skimming it really fast right now. Sorry, I feel like I'm talking super quickly so we can get to lunch. But I highly recommend looking it up. It's worked out really well for Breaker. I've never done it at another company, and it makes us move so fast. So we release our iOS app about once a week, which is crazy. Like, that's so fast. The App Store review times are now down to, I don't know if anybody else has found this, about a day. Like, we submit, and by the next business day, it pretty much is approved. It's hilarious because the test flight is like 2 or 3 days. So like to submit something to our beta testers takes longer than submitting it to the App Store. My tip there is as soon as you have a new build, even if it's not complete and ready at the end of the week, put it in for review for the test, and then each subsequent release of that same version number to test flight, they'll automatically pass through. You only have to do it for the first one. So I usually start my week by submitting to test flight, waiting for it to be approved, and then everything can go through test flight beyond that. And then at the end of the week, I'll do the release to the actual App Store, which only takes about 24 hours to be approved. The other crazy side effect of our new product process, or what we've been working on at Breaker, is that we don't have a bug tracker. Like, oh my God, I feel like we deserve a round of applause for not having a bug tracker. How many people actually like using a bug tracker here? Does anybody actually like bugatory? I call it bugatory. It's like where bugs go to like sit and die until somebody works on them. We don't do that at all. We have no issue tracker, no bug tracker. We do take in bug reports from users. We actually use an app called Bug Life. Has anybody ever used like any of these bug reporting tools where you take a screenshot and it reports a bug? So we listen to users' feedback, but then when we do our product planning, we bring those up. We're like, hey, users have been reporting this bug. We should work on it. But if it doesn't make the cut and doesn't make priority, why have it sit in a bug tracker? Like, it would drive me crazy. Every other startup I've worked on, every other company I've worked at, having this just place that bugs go to die. Bugs don't go to die anywhere in Breaker. Every week, we talk about bugs. We talk about things we want to fix, and they don't sit in a bug tracker. All right, just weird side note. We work very iteratively at Breaker. It's another way we're able to work fast. We actually redesigned the entire app, but we did it one screen at a time, and we added features and improved things as we went. So our designer, Emma, wrote a whole blog post about how she did this and how users, I don't think they even noticed that we redesigned the app one screen at a time, but it really worked. I don't know if you can totally see the difference between the two, but it's a huge change over a very long period of time. So lessons I've learned from startups. This is sort of summary, and then we can get to lunch. We're about 5 minutes late. I'm so sorry, you guys. Lessons learned, build on the weekends. Get ideas out fast. Like, don't quit your day job. Definitely just, get your idea out there, test it with users. Like, it's easiest to fail when you have nothing to lose. So don't have anything to lose. Like just make it easy on yourself. I'm so glad I did that. I actually worked at Dropbox as my day job, and then on Sundays I worked on Breaker. I know not everyone has the luxury and the time to do it, but if you do, I highly recommend doing things that way. Do business tasks at the last minute, like the incorporation docs, all of that boring stuff. Don't do it until you have to do it. Like just as soon as you actually have to do it for a reason, then handle that messiness. Listen to users and evolve your product process so you can work iteratively. It's been great for Breaker. We've been able to build things so quickly, and we build iteratively and collaboratively as opposed to sort of like top down, which has been really fun and I think makes everyone feel like the work that they're doing is really valuable. Okay, that's just my photo card. So thanks. Yeah, have a good lunch, and come see me for office hours.